Viggo Mortensen didn't become an actor to chase fame. He didn't break out in Hollywood until his 40s, and even then he refused to sell out. Throughout the 80s and 90s, he worked in smaller roles and smaller films, but then came The Lord of the Rings. Cast at the last minute as Aragorn, he threw himself into the role, breaking toes on camera, doing nearly all of his own stunts, and even carrying his sword everywhere he went. The trilogy made him a star, but that was never the point. Instead of cashing in, he turned down other franchises and bigger projects, choosing riskier films instead. He starved himself for The Road, stuffed himself with pizza for Green Book, and earned Oscar nominations along the way. For him, fame was never the goal. Acting, painting, writing, and music were all just different ways to express himself, not ways to be seen. This is the story of when an actor didn't care about fame and only focused on the work itself. This is Viggo Mortensen. From the beginning, Mortensen treated acting like any other form of art. Even in the smallest parts, he gave everything, focusing on the details and pushing himself physically as if the film depended on it. That mix of discipline and intensity set him apart long before anyone even knew his name. Born in New York City in 1958, his early life was as restless as his career would later be. By the age of 3, he had already lived in Venezuela, Denmark, and Argentina, where he learned Spanish and fell in love with the country. But when he was 11, his parents divorced, so he moved back to New York with his mother and 2 brothers. He finished high school there and later graduated from St. Lawrence University in 1980 with degrees in Spanish and political science. But instead of starting a steady career, he spent the next few years drifting between the UK, Spain, and Denmark working odd jobs. One of them was at a movie theater, and it was there he decided to become an actor. So he returned to New York and auditioned for what he thought was a play, but it turned out to be an acting school, and that mistake kickstarted his acting career. His first film role was in 1985's Witness, playing an Amish farmer in the Harrison Ford detective film. It was a small role, but it was his first experience in a hit film. 2 years later, he landed his first lead in Prison, a horror movie about a haunted prison. Even on a small budget, Mortensen went all in, shaking so violently in one scene that he broke a chair and running through freezing water in just his underwear. The rest of the 80s kept him busy with supporting roles in Salvation and Fresh Horses, but none of them helped his career too much. The 90s were when people really started to take notice of him. The Reflecting Skin was his strongest role yet, a horror film about a boy convinced that his neighbor is a vampire. Mortensen was top billed and the film reviewed well. That same year, he appeared in Young Guns 2 and Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, playing one of the cannibal family members. But his first real breakthrough came in 1991 with Sean Penn's directorial debut, The Indian Runner. Mortensen played Frank, a violent Vietnam vet opposite David Morse as his sheriff brother. Penn thought Mortensen was too nice in real life, so he sent him to spend time with a Hells Angels member. The movie got mixed reviews, but critics praised his intensity and willingness to take on risky, unlikable characters.
Why does it scare you so much? Why does it scare you? Why? I'm fixing a bridge for...
By 1993, he was working constantly. He had a supporting role in Boiling Point with Wesley Snipes, playing the partner of an aging con man. He had memorable scenes in Carlito's Way with Al Pacino where he showed off his range despite little screen time. And he was the lead in American Yakuza, playing an undercover FBI agent that was drawn into the Yakuza. Mortensen later admitted he only took the roles because he was broke, but critics singled him out as the best part of the movie, saying if you watch this film, you'd wonder why he hadn't been recognized by the industry much earlier. 1995 brought his biggest film yet with Tony Scott's Crimson Tide. Starring alongside Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman, Mortensen played the submarine's weapons officer caught in the middle of conflicting nuclear orders. It was his most successful film yet, doing well critically and commercially. That same year, he played Lucifer in The Prophecy and appeared in The Passion of Darkly Noon with Brendan Fraser. Neither did well, but at least The Prophecy showed off some of his over-the-top acting. In 1996, he joined Jane Campion's The Portrait of a Lady with Nicole Kidman, which he filmed at the same time as Daylight with Sylvester Stallone. He shot both in Italy, driving back and forth between sets. Daylight was his highest budget film of the decade. It's a disaster thriller about people trapped in a collapsed tunnel. It performed well enough at the box office, but critics didn't love it. In 1997, he worked with Ridley Scott on G.I. Jane, playing the Navy SEAL commander who pushes Demi Moore's character through brutal SEAL training as the first woman to attempt the program. Mortensen spent months interviewing SEALs and studying their training, and even skipped the cast boot camp. It made the cast resent him, which was exactly what he wanted to help him stay in character. The film didn't review well, but Mortensen's commitment stood out. He rounded off the decade with more highs and lows. People still wonder why they remade that Psycho remake in 1998. whereas his other film that year, A Perfect Murder, was a Dial M for Murder remake that worked much better. And he closed the decade with A Walk on the Moon alongside Diane Lane. She wanted to cast him so badly, she even gave up part of her salary to afford him. By the end of the 90s, Mortensen had built up a huge resume. He was rarely the lead, but he'd proven himself to be versatile and committed, with directors praising his intensity and willingness to disappear into any role. He wasn't famous yet, but his slow rise was about to pay off. But his next role, one he was cast for at the last minute, would completely change his career. It wasn't his next released film, the Sandra Bullock comedy 28 Days, that changed his career. That one didn't do too well, but by then Mortensen was already deep into filming the trilogy that would redefine his life and career, The Lord of the Rings. Director Peter Jackson had taken on the difficult task of adapting Tolkien's books. The story follows Frodo, a hobbit who inherits a powerful ring forged by the Dark Lord Sauron, and his journey to destroy it alongside the Fellowship. The project bounced around studios for years and was almost condensed into a single film before New Line agreed to back a full trilogy, all shot at once in New Zealand from 1999 to 2000. The film blended groundbreaking digital and practical effects, pushed motion capture tech forward, and new software was even created to simulate massive crowds. Documentaries and other videos cover the production in more detail, but in this video we wanted to focus more on the cast. Everyone seemed born for their roles, like Ian McKellen as Gandalf or Andy Serkis as Gollum. And then there was Stuart Townsend as Aragorn, who only lasted 4 days. Peter Jackson realized the role needed someone older, and that is when Viggo Mortensen was called. He wasn't too eager at first, having never read the books, but his son was a huge fan and convinced him to take the role. Within days he was on set, and although he was a last-minute addition, he became one of the trilogy's best castings, because he threw himself into every aspect of Aragorn. Mortensen trained hard on horseback, bonding so deeply with his horse that he later bought it after filming was done. He even bought Arwen's horse for Liv Tyler's stunt double when the bidding got too high for her. And he even trained harder with a sword, with the fight choreographer calling him the best swordsman he had ever trained. He insisted on using a real steel blade and did nearly all of his own stunts, even accidentally deflecting a real knife thrown at him on set. He carried his sword everywhere, even in public, which led to some awkward encounters with police. And he stitched his own costume when needed, camped on location a few times, and stayed in character so convincingly that Jackson once spent a full half-hour talking to him and referring to him as Aragorn without realizing it. Unlike other famous method acting stories, Aragorn was not annoying to have on set, unless you count him persuading people to camp out with him in the wilderness. And like Aragorn, Mortensen endured a lot throughout the films. He broke 2 toes kicking a helmet, with his actual scream of pain making the final cut. He snapped a tooth during Helm's Deep, visiting a dentist in full costume and fake blood so continuity would not be broken. He was dragged underwater during a river scene and barely escaped. And he even showed up to set with one side of his face fully bruised from surfing, forcing the crew to only film one side of his face for a scene. But what made his Aragorn stand out was not just the injuries or the sword fighting. It was the way he played him as a man haunted by grief and self-doubt, using a lot of restraint in his performance.
I would have gone with you to the end. Into the very fires of Mordor.
He made Aragorn feel very human in a world of elves, wizards, and orcs, and by the third film, his performance had quietly become the emotional backbone of the trilogy. The movies were released in December of 2001, 2002, and 2003, each outperforming the last. They tore it up at the box office and received universal acclaim, especially at the Oscars. The Fellowship of the Ring earned 13 Oscar nominations and won 4. The Two Towers earned 6 nominations and won 2. And The Return of the King won all 11 of its nominations, tying the all-time record. For almost any actor, headlining a trilogy like this would be the peak of their career, a role to ride straight into a blockbuster career and piles of money. But no, Mortensen is not like most actors. Aragorn was not a ticket to fame, it was just another role that he poured himself into before turning back to the smaller, riskier projects that truly spoke to him. If anything, The Lord of the Rings gave him the freedom to choose the stories he wanted and the time to keep exploring the other arts he cared about outside of acting. Mortensen's next film made it clear where he wanted his career to go. He didn't cash in with blockbusters. Instead, he leaned into leading roles that challenged him and began one of his most rewarding partnerships with a director. In 2004, he starred in the Western epic Hidalgo, playing real-life horseman Frank Hopkins competing in a horse race in Arabia. Mortensen did horse stunts even the stuntman couldn't do, and he bought the horse who played Hidalgo once filming wrapped. He also recorded the Spanish dub himself, but sadly, the film with its high budget flopped at the box office. But his next project set the tone for the rest of the decade. A History of Violence in 2005 was the first of 4 collaborations with David Cronenberg. Mortensen played a small-town diner owner whose act of self-defense draws the attention of mobsters. Mortensen called it the best film he had ever made. The story is simple, but the weight of it comes from the performances. And Mortensen's and Ed Harris's intensity elevated the film. It did well with critics and audiences, and it was also the last major Hollywood release to come out on VHS. He then starred in A la Triste, one of the most expensive Spanish-language films ever made, playing a 17th century soldier and mercenary before reuniting with Cronenberg for Eastern Promises in 2007, one of his most transformative roles. He played Nikolai, a driver and disposer of bodies for a Russian crime family. To prepare, Mortensen traveled without a translator across Russia, studied gang life and prison tattoos, and left Russian news channels on 24/7 to master the accent.
I'm driver. I go left, I go right, I go straight ahead, that's it.
Critics were shocked by his performance, in a good way, and the famous bathhouse fight scene remains one of the most brutal and memorable of his career. The film also earned him his first Oscar nomination, though it was an especially tough year to win. In 2008, he reunited with his History of Violence co-star Ed Harris for Appaloosa, a western that Harris also directed. Mortensen initially turned it down, but Harris convinced him, and within 2 days he showed up with research, wardrobe notes, and prop suggestions. Harris later praised how quickly and completely he committed to the role. That same year, he starred in Good, playing a German professor whose research paper on euthanasia is exploited by the Nazis to push their own agenda. Unlike Appaloosa, it flopped with both critics and audiences, easily the weakest of his late 2000s films. He ended the decade with one of his most unforgettable roles in 2009's The Road. Based on Cormac McCarthy's novel, it follows a father and son struggling to survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The film relied heavily on his performance. Mortensen starved himself, losing about 30 pounds and often slept in his character's clothes. He looked so worn down that he was once thrown out of a store during production because people thought he was homeless. It was another film he initially considered passing on, but the result was one of the most haunting performances, with the film being described as gorgeous but in a horrible way.
We have to. We will survive this. We are not gonna quit. We're not gonna quit.
After The Road, he took a break from acting for a couple of years. You may have noticed that he didn't act in many movies after The Lord of the Rings. That's because Mortensen had always been working with other forms of art, and this decade he devoted even more time to them. He's an abstract painter, with some of his murals even appearing in films like A Perfect Murder. He writes poetry in English, Spanish, and Danish, often blending it with music. Over the years, he's released albums with guitarist Buckethead, where his poetry was combined with guitar. His biggest passion might have been photography, where he carried a camera everywhere, even on set, capturing cool behind-the-scenes moments while filming The Lord of the Rings. With some of the money he got from those films, he founded the Percival Press in 2002, a publishing company to support artists struggling to find publishers. It's an outlet for voices that might have gone unheard, and it was through Percival Press that he published much of his own work that decade, including poetry albums and books combining his poems and photos. For Mortensen, acting was never separate from the rest of his work. He treated a Cronenberg film, a book of poetry, and a photography collection as different ways of expressing the same thing. Fame never drove him. He simply cared about the work, whatever form it took. And that's why he didn't chase the next big franchise or play it safe. Instead, he lost himself in the roles that spoke to him and kept publishing his art through Percival Press. Every project, no matter how small or strange, came from the same place. And that same mindset carried him into the next chapter of his career, where his love for storytelling only grew stronger as he took on more creative responsibility. When it came to choosing films after The Lord of the Rings, Mortensen said he never avoided any certain genres or budgets. He only looked for stories that interested him. He was even approached for other franchises but usually turned them down, calling them predictable and underwritten. He even declined to return as Aragorn in The Hobbit since the character never appeared in the book. That was always his approach, and this next chapter of his career proved it. He started the decade reuniting with Cronenberg for A Dangerous Method in 2011, playing Sigmund Freud during the early days of psychoanalysis, exploring his relationship with Carl Jung and Sabina Spielrein. Mortensen immersed himself in Freud's writings, traveled to Vienna to visit his home, and even suggested he should always have a cigar in every scene.
You realize this makes you undisputed crown prince, don't you? My son and heir?
The performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination, and the film continued his streak with Cronenberg, making them 3 for 3 with critics. The following year, he had his first producer credit with Everybody Has a Plan, his second Spanish-language film. It didn't review well, but it showed his support of more personal projects. Then came 2014. He starred in The Two Faces of January, playing a con man who accidentally kills a private detective investigating him. And Far From Men, a French drama where he played a schoolteacher during the Algerian War. But the film that best captured his creativity was Jauja, an Argentine-Danish film about a Danish man in search of his daughter set in 1880s Argentina. Mortensen not only acted in it, but also produced, composed music, corrected subtitles, and even helped design the posters and costumes after researching Danish military history. The film received strong reviews, and it gave him a taste of the creative control he'd expand on later. He starred in fewer films after that, but they were some of his best performances. In 2016's Captain Fantastic, he played a father raising 6 children off the grid who rejoined society. He balanced warmth with intensity to make a likable character, with critics saying the film belonged to him, earning an Oscar nomination for it. 2 years later came Green Book, where he transformed into Tony Lip, the Italian-American driver hired to take African pianist Don Shirley through the Deep South in 1962. Mortensen gained 20 pounds for the role, mostly by stuffing himself with pizza, pasta, and desserts, and even insisted on eating for real in nearly every food scene. He kept redoing the milk chugging scene and ate hot dogs on camera instead of spitting them out into buckets between takes. He even added the real Tony Lip's habit of folding entire pizzas into the film, but the commitment paid off. The film was a box office hit, won Best Picture, and earned Mortensen his 3rd Oscar nomination.
Whatever you do it 100%. When you work, work. When you laugh, laugh. When you eat like it's your last meal.
And yet he still pushed himself to try something different, giving directing a go. His directorial debut came in 2020 with Falling, a deeply personal project that he also wrote, made music for, and eventually starred in after financing required a big name. He played a gay man trying to care for his homophobic father who was suffering from dementia. It was very personal because both his parents, 3 of his 4 grandparents, and many aunts and uncles had also suffered from dementia. He worked without pay to keep the budget under control. The film wasn't flashy, but it was meaningful, well reviewed, and proof that he could bring the same dedication behind the camera as he always had in front of it. In 2022, he returned to Cronenberg for their 4th collaboration, Crimes of the Future. Mortensen played a man who grows new organs, with a restrained performance that helped anchor this weird body horror film. That same year, he took on something more comfortable to watch in Ron Howard's 13 Lives, playing one of the divers who helped rescue the Thai boys soccer team trapped in a flooded cave. Mortensen and Colin Farrell insisted on doing their own diving scenes, even filming some of the tight shots themselves. It helped make the film feel more grounded and immersive, a strong dramatization of one of the most inspiring true stories. He took on another Argentine film in 2023 with Eureka, reuniting with a Jauja director before directing his 2nd film, The Dead Don't Hurt. It's a western about a woman left to fend for herself in a corrupt town during the Civil War. Like Falling, he wasn't meant to act in it but stepped in when the lead dropped out. The film was intimate, personal, and well reviewed, with Mortensen involved in every part of the process. It was the kind of project that was never going to be seen by millions, and that was the point. Mortensen never cared about fame. He never saw acting as something different from painting, music, poetry, or photography. To him, they all satisfied his curiosity and need to create. That's why he turned down the easy paychecks, avoided franchises that didn't feel right, and kept choosing small, unusual films long after he had the freedom to do anything he wanted. For most actors, The Lord of the Rings would have been the peak, the role they built their careers around. For Viggo Mortensen, it was just another role. His career had never been about chasing recognition, but about following what spoke to him, whether that meant a Cronenberg thriller, a Spanish war drama, or a book of poems. That's why he stands out, because this is what it looks like when an actor doesn't care about fame and only cares about the work itself. So there you have it, Viggo Mortensen's career and all of his best films. What's your favorite role of his? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and subscribe, and check out our Patreon for some cool perks. But until next time, have a good one.